from Fort Worth, Texas on the 4th of July.
In this lesson, we're going to talk about cultural self-awareness, or learning more about your own culture. Because I'm U.S. American and I work primarily with U.S. American students, today we're going to focus on U.S. American culture. Often people don't realize that they have a culture, or in fact many cultures. They think that the way that they act is universal or natural. And so one of the steps in gaining cultural intelligence and intercultural competence is recognizing that you yourself have a culture. When I say you have a culture, what I mean is that you have cultural influences. You're a member of a culture, and you think and act in ways that support and reinforce your culture. You have a way of life that's been taught to you, just as other people have a way of life that's been taught to them. This is culture. For this lesson, I'm going to focus mostly on national cultural identity, but of course we are all a combination of the many cultures, the many identities that we have, including our gender identity, regional identity, professional identity, racial identity, and more. One of the first things that people notice when they cross cultures, besides just the experience of the differences that they encounter, is the experience of being the other, perhaps for the first time in their life. The experience of being stereotyped and being judged often feels very unfair, or at least is a very negative kind of experience. So I hope that at a minimum, this experience gives you the opportunity to develop empathy and to move away from stereotyping others. This is the first step in gaining intercultural competence. But as one of my favorite authors, Chimamanda Adichie, says, the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. So let's start with the fact that there is some truth in stereotypes. There are some commonalities that we share. So what is it that U.S. Americans share, culture-wise? I've picked the 4th of July as the day to do this lesson on cultural self-awareness because national holidays are a wonderful way to gain insight into cultures. As I've said previously, we can learn about deep cultural values and perspectives by examining visible cultural manifestations. Visible cultural manifestations can come in a number of ways: in the daily habits and activities, in the structure and layout of spaces, in the ways and approaches to interactions, in leisure time activities, and in the rites, rituals, and celebrations of a group of people. So let's think about some of these and learn more about ourselves. So first, in the daily habits and activities. In the U.S., we spend our time going places, getting places quickly, working, shopping, fitting as much as possible into our days. At the end of the day, we may ask each other, "What did you do today?" All of these point to a value of productivity. Next, in the structure and layout of spaces. In the U.S., we tend to expand horizontally. We use space for ourselves individually. We even have folkloric songs about wide ranges where the deer and the antelope play, beautiful spacious skies and bountiful lands that stretch from sea to shining sea. We adore and celebrate space. In the ways and structures of interactions. In the U.S., we tend to use smiles to convey friendliness, and friendliness is our assumed mode of interaction. This comes from a history of immigrants where people needed to use facial expressions to show that they were non-threatening when they didn't have a language to convey themselves. But it also showcases a value of equality and optimism, which are very key American traits. In the rites, rituals, and celebrations. Many people tend to think that Americans don't have rites and rituals in the way that they may see perhaps the Japanese do. And it's true that we don't, for a number of historical reasons. Our Puritan history, our history of immigrants, we don't necessarily have large religious influenced rites. But nonetheless, we have important cultural rites and rituals. For example, if I play this song, you can immediately picture the setting and the attire and the importance of the occasion. And of course, today, the 4th of July, is an important celebration that can give you all sorts of clues about our cultural values and influences. For example, the meaning of the day, celebrating our independence from England. This was, undoubtedly, revolutionary, pun intended. This break from a colonial power, this declaration of independence, this creation of a democracy not only changed the course of history, it developed a set of values and a mindset of independence, initiative, entrepreneurship, and even a bit of rebellion and certain disregard for authority and old ways of doing things. The celebration of the day, picnics, parades, fireworks, these all speak to the ways that we like to socialize. We like big visible displays, short spans of socializing, celebrations of military and service people, and by extension, celebrating the strength and bravery of everyday people. Here are some other typical U.S. American traits. As I go through these, think about how they manifest themselves. I'll give you some ideas. First, we're informal in the way we socialize, like picnics and potlucks where everyone brings something, which also speaks to a value of equality. In the way we address one another, which is typically with first names. And in the ways that we dress, typically much less formal than other societies. We don't like hierarchy, a legacy of our rebellion against colonial rule. Egalitarian. From the Declaration of Independence to the way we line up at the post office, we approach life as if we are all equal, as if you're not better than me. Now, interestingly, that is not the same thing as saying, I'm not better than you, which is a more communal understanding of equality. And that leads us to our next American trait, individuality. We like to think of ourselves as unique individuals, which is one reason why I think U.S. Americans don't often recognize that they have a culture. But individuality very much defines the way we want to be seen and how we approach life. That we need to get ahead as individuals, that our individual success defines us, and that our individual identity should be validated. Next, directness. We are fairly direct in our interactions. We don't beat around the bush, and we believe that honesty is the best policy. Next, practical. We are practical in that we prefer reason, not emotion, to drive our decisions, and we tend to dismiss things that seem unduly ceremonious as fluffy. Tied to this is a preference for efficiency, again driven by this desire for productivity, which has led to a culture of drive-thrus, multitasking, and innovations. We like to acquire things. A more negative label for this is materialism, and there are many in the world who see U.S. Americans as overly focused on making money and using wealth as a measure of success. While that might not be true for everyone, I do think there is a strong drive in U.S. American culture to acquire things, which we can even see today in a small way, where we use a national holiday as a time for sales. And generally speaking, we are friendly people in the way we smile and engage with strangers, in certain settings anyway, like stores, waiting lines, even sometimes elevators. And in the way we interact with our supervisors and even other people in authority, like police officers. Although we tend to feel uncomfortable when friendliness goes beyond superficial questions. As I covered these traits, you may find it hard to imagine any other way of thinking or acting. And this is case in point what culture does. It habituates us to a way of living so that we think that it is universal. And so the value of crossing cultures is recognizing that it is not universal and not even preferred by everyone. Another interesting point about culture is that these values are aspects that we aspire to, but not necessarily ones that we live up to. For every one of these, you could say, well, I'm a U.S. American, and I don't hold these values. Or a non-American might enumerate the many ways we are not informal, or not egalitarian, or not friendly. Furthermore, these values may even conflict with one another. For example, those moments when friendliness and efficiency conflict, like when you're rushing to check out of a store and you weigh how friendly to be. Again, What a culture does is provide a framework or a set of guiding principles for how to behave in order to be socially accepted. But at the end of the day, we are all individuals who make individual choices. So again, how culture works is we grow up in and are enculturated in these patterns and habits and ways of being, such to the point that we think they're universal. We may notice but not even think about these visible manifestations, let alone the underlying values and meanings. So it's only in crossing cultures that we notice that there are differences. And so what we want to do is gain intercultural competence, not just to notice the differences, not to judge or label them, but to actually understand them. So all of these things I've mentioned, celebrations, holidays, folklore, national songs, heroes, leisure activities, all of these things can give you insight into the shared history and values of a place. In essence, it's culture. And so through doing this, you can learn about your own culture and other cultures that you visit. For many travelers, they say that one of the most important things that they learned was more about themselves, not necessarily the place that they visited. And this is indeed one of the values of crossing cultures. You begin to see what's universal to us as humans, what's unique to us as individuals, and what's part of this shared cultural experience. And so it takes a long time to learn about another culture, but in seeing these visible differences, you can self-examine and learn more about yourself and your own culture, and this is deeply valuable too. Because in doing this, you can gain an appreciation for the ways that you've been enculturated, recognize that it's been taught and reinforced to you, accept it and value it and want that as your own culture, but also appreciate that others have a different way of living, a different lived experience, and that that's equally valid and right as well. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to learn more about yourself as a cultural being and to learn more about your own culture. I hope you'll use these tools to continue to explore yourself, to learn more about cultures in general, and to learn more about your home and your host cultures in particular.